Shalom and welcome to another edition of Parasha Talk. I'm Rabbi Elliot Malamit in Highland Park, New Jersey, at the Highland Park Conservative Temple Congregation on Shemen, and joining me are my good friends, Rabbi Barry Chesler, Solomon Schechter Day School of Long Island, Rabbi Jeremy Kalmanowski on Sheikh Chesed in New York City. We are recording this on day 657, a number that is beyond our imagination in terms of the suffering of the hostages and in general, the extent of this war, praying that this war will end, uh, and we hope that the hostages come home with unbearable suffering that we are experiencing and we are, of course, witnessing. We are counting this kind of sphira. It has become a different kind of ritual in Jewish life. So we note that at the beginning of our discussion, always thinking about them. And of course, we want to give a big shout out to our friends in Machane Ramah in the Berkshires, who are, I think, they're going to be finishing their first month. Uh,
Just today, the uh, the Anshe Chesed was the site of the pickup bus for second month.
there you go.
But I gotta tell you something. I've never heard of such a thing. Well, I have a kid in the shul who went up on Sunday for the intercession rafting trip. Nobody ever invited me on an
How
intercession
about that?
rafting trip. The camp has developed and grown since our days.
There you go. The best that we've done was maybe a hike to the waterfalls or to the beautiful what's called the Stone Church. It was always a lot of fun. We're missing being there, but we know that we are being broadcast live on Kol Rama 102.3 FM and also recorded and many of our devoted listeners in Machane Rama and throughout the world, making us the most listened to Parsha podcast ever in one region of the country. We have this week two Parshiot. We're completing the Book of Bemidbar. It's Parshiot Matot Masei, the double Parsha Matot Masei. I would say that you know we get to the end of Bemidbar and it feels like we gotta just kind of put everything together and smack everything together as we end this book. Going to comment at the beginning.
You kind of feel like the author or the editor was running out of steam and just threw a bunch of stuff in because he had no other place to put it.
Exactly. And just to remark that the end of a book in the Torah always is a significant milestone. Really, from here on in, Dvarim, where we, mentally, psychologically, spiritually, we're gonna we shift our focus, believe it or not, to the renewal, end and beginning, and renewal. But I want to focus on just a couple of things. I think maybe we'll talk about the story in Parshot Matot, which has a lot of resonance in terms of what it means to be a nation in solidarity, and we're going to talk about that in a second, and maybe to have a word about the Haftarah. This week being the second of the 3 weeks prior to Tisha B'Av. This is a unique combination because this week is also Rosh Chodesh Av, but the focus will be on the Haftorah that is usually done for the combination of the Parshiot Matot Masei. So, with no further ado, I want to focus on chapter 32 in the Book of Bamidbar, and this is the story of Reuben and Gad, two Leah tribes. They are, interestingly enough, firstborn tribes in the Leah grouping. I mean, there are two clusters of tribes, the Rachel tribes and the Leah tribes. The Leah tribes is, really the dominant number of tribes. The Rachel tribes being Yosef, Benjamin, and the tribes of Bilhah, the concubine, the Rachel's handmaiden. The Leah tribes being all the children of Leah, and the Zilpah tribes, the firstborn of Leah is Reuven, and the firstborn of Zilpah, the concubine of Leah, of the handmaiden of Leah, is God. Okay, so it's very interesting that these two prominent firstborns are in the cluster of tribes that are, it's not a rebellion here, but we'll go into the pasuk. It says, Umikne Rav Hayal Rivnei Ruvain. They had a large flock. They had a large flock. V'livnei Gad atzum meod. The tribe of God had a mighty flock. That's a very unusual way to talk about a flock as big as in terms of numerically big and mighty. Your animals are mighty animals, okay? Vayiru et Eretz Yazer. They see this land on the other side of the Jordan, a land which was not part of the quote unquote promised land. Yazer, Gilad, V'nei makom mikneh, and it's a good pasture land. And so they make a delegation to Moses, Vayavo b'nei Gad v'nei Ruvain. They petition Moses, and they say to Moses and Eleazar, and all of and here it's interesting, the El Nisi'e Ha'idah. So it's like the synod of the whole people. They're all the princes, all the tribal leaders, and I, this this total chutzpah. It's total chutzpah what they say. They say, Atarot v'divan v'yazer v'nimra, they name of all these areas, regions, cities, or villages. Ha'aretz asher yikah Adonai lifnei Adonai adat Yisrael, the land that God has defeated, Eretz miknehi, it's a pasture land. V'lavadecha mikneh, we have a pasture, we have a flock. And then they say, if we have found favor, Yuteina Aretz Azot Lavadecha, let us have this land la'achuzah. Al tavireinu et ha'yarden. We don't want to cross. And I'm saying this, I'm trying to read this as if I've never read it before. I'm going like, the chutzpah, the the gall of these people. How would the tribal chieftains receive this petition? How would Moses have received this petition other than to say, we don't want to, we're not interested. We're not interested in your land. We'll stay here. You guys can go, but we'll stay here. How do you react to their petition, Rabbi Kamenetsky? Go ahead.
How do I react to this petition? Well, certainly one of the major themes of Bemidbar is the people's, like faithlessness, or what's another term? Their inability to rise to the occasion of the mission. And this story seems to me, of a piece with some of those things. I wish we went back to Egypt, or we're not up to conquering the land, or the giants intimidate us. And I can only view this as an episode of moral and national fecklessness, that they just, we can make some money here over in the Golan Heights, or contemporary Jordan, and so why would we want to deal with all the difficulties of conquest? And so I just read this as a pretty negative assessment of these self-interested shepherds, who Moses is going to tell them, you have to participate, and they say, okay, of course, we wouldn't think of not participating, but I do think they think of not participating.
So I want to ask, I'm the Canadian here, okay, and I'm reading it from a Canadian perspective, which is that there's an issue of separatism here. One of the dynamics
Well, they wanted to speak French, Elliot, if
there
that
you
helps.
so they want to see themselves as a distinct society, and they are basically saying, we don't want to share in the burden of conquest, and we don't want to share in the solidarity of the story here. And as I say, I'm reading this with the sense that there it's an affront. Now, of course, America has its experience of secession, but I just want to put it like Barry, you are a resident, historian, I guess. So compare and contrast the movement of secession here. Would you characterize this as an attempt at secession or attempt at saying we want to go our own way?
It's a intriguing idea. I don't think there's enough in the text to make a full comparison. And that in and of itself is also quite surprising because we don't really get the reaction of the other Israelite tribes. They've been traveling together for 40 years. They're almost where they're supposed to go. And then these two tribes, two and a half tribes, however you want to characterize them, say, you know what, we've gone far enough. Now, what's so interesting to me is number one, they want to remain shepherds. That's the old way of life. The Israelites are going into the land to build a new society, which is not going to be a shepherding society, which is kind of ephemeral. It doesn't really make a lasting contribution to civilization, I would think. Um, and they also exclude themselves from the promised land. So they deliberately want to say, we're not going to cross the river. We're going to stay on this side. And what I find kind of sad in a way is that just a few weeks ago at the end of Shalach, we read the third paragraph of the Shema. You should not be deceived by your eyes and by your heart. And they seem to be deceived by what they see. How do they know they can't be shepherds in Israel?
Not only that,
There's,
but it's like, weren't the other tribes shepherds? I mean, it's
I think that's kind of doesn't make sense,
it
right? To
doesn't.
be shepherds for 40 years like that, I don't think so. I mean, God is providing them with everything. They wouldn't need half the things that God provides if they were actually shepherds,
Right. So
right?
it's
They would have milk and meat. That's what sheep provide.
right. So there are a lot of little narrative problems here.
Yeah. So, but I think that what I would really like to know is when they come to the the synod, as you called it, of Moses, Eleazar, and the princes of the other tribes, I would want to know how the other tribes reacted. I can't believe they say, "What a great idea."
Right. Well, Moses does take the initiative here, and he responds in a way that I think is a kind of smackdown. It's a real smackdown. It's verse 6. "Vayamar Moshe livnei Gad v'livnei Reuben," Moses says to the children of Gad and Reuven, "Ha'achechem yavo lamilchama." Are your brothers going to go to war? Vatem tishvu po, and you're going to sit here, and that's a very powerful stinging. It's you're not going to share in the destiny of the people if you're not going to take up the collective burden. I mean, these words are so profoundly resonant today in Israel. You see this actual verse. I've seen it draped on balconies right outside. I was just in Israel. It wasn't on this trip that I saw this, but on previous trips outside of the president's home on Rehov Anasi, there is an apartment with this on a banner, this verse on a banner. Are your brothers ha'achechem yavo lamilchama, or will they go to war? V'atem teshvu po, and you will stay here. And that is a direct reference in the current political climate of the blanket exemptions of the many in the Haredi
It
community
doesn't, yeah,
who are
yeah.
not, who want exemptions, who claim exemption or can receive exemptions for Torah study. And this is an enormous source of conflict and contention in contemporary Israel that, the expression in Hebrew is mitachad la'alunka, we are going to be under the stretcher. Who's under the stretcher? And it's a remarkable image in terms of, everybody who carries the burden of service and the burden of defending the country. And so the Haredim, characteristically say, well, we're studying Torah, and that's the burden. We have the burden of this, and of course, it sounds almost absurd in the sense that how can you compare putting your life on the line and giving your life up, being killed, being maimed, wounded, etc., to the privileges of study that are often simply a mask for
I mean, it's of course completely absurd. Uh, the we should care about Torah study. We should care about culture and not just it's the Sefer v'Sayaf. It's the sword and the book that we do have them both, and it's not like it's not like cultural and intellectual and spiritual things are not important, but obviously there is an outrageous failure to share the national burden on the part of the exempted yeshiva students. By the way, I don't want to consider, but all the time Israelis say to me, like, what are you still doing outside? How can you not come here and join this society? I don't understand why you think of yourself as a Zionist, and yet you've just simply chosen not to live here. And I have my answers, but this is also a resonant question.
No
And
question about it. I think we do struggle with these questions, and various we're all products of the accidents of our birth. We born in
Mine wasn't an accident.
you
or
know
as you know,
we, we we were we all came into the world without having to make our decision geographically about it, and have
my my funeral today, the funeral that I had today, um, my late synagogue member Ed Krowitz, his mother was from Kamenetz Podolsk. She actually has they were as befits the time, they were kind of lefty political. They were actually quite Zionist, but they left behind religion. But she has also prominent rabbinic connection in her family. Anyway, it's almost all of us North Americans. It's because somebody picked up from Europe to transform their life on a journey. Um, Most of us, that's true. Some of us, of course, it's because somebody left Syria or Iraq to go on that journey, and and then he spent most of his life, or much of his professional life, representing the United States Foreign Service in Southeast Asia. He was an economist in Southeast Asia during the Vietnam War. Like that must have just been a crazy and difficult
Yeah.
time. But I wanted to returning from the story from today to another story about these folks in the book of Joshua. And this story, seems faithless for the reasons that we said, that they're not sharing the burdens until Moses basically shames them into it. But in Joshua 22, there's a different kind of story. Is that they've done their duty, and they have participated in the conquest, and in fact are going to walk away with a very big prize. They did their duty, and they will walk away with plenty of booty. They would get lots of gold and silver and all the stuff that they're going to take, and they're going to go back to Transjordan, to Bashan, which is like contemporary Golan Heights, and Gilad, which I think is Gilad to the south of that, but it's also in contemporary Jordan. By the way, there's a really important biblical character and an important character in the overall sweep of Judaism, who's a Giladi, and so maybe we should hear something of that resonance when we hear about Eliyahu Hanavi HaGiladi. Maybe he's a Kohen, I think so. He's probably not from these tribes, but perhaps there's some echo to a contemporary audience. But in that story over there in Joshua 22, an astonishing rumor hits the people over in the Promised Land that Reuben, Gad, and Chatzi Shevet Menashe, and half of the Menashites, have built an altar over in Transjordan.
Yeah.
And Now, the way we read the Bible, we understand, and we have plenty of evidence, the way we, conservative rabbis read the Bible, that the text develops over time. And it's not true that in the earliest times of Joshua, um, there was one single national altar and that everybody worshiped in the same place, as the book of Deuteronomy will insist. That's a development. But in whatever time it is, and whatever the case is for other altars, local shrines in the Promised Land, it is seen as an outrage that there is an altar, a very big one, extremely elaborate one, that these 2.5 tribes have built over across the Jordan. And so Pinchas, who, by the way, we know about Pinchas, he's got a short fuse, and you maybe don't want to mess with him. Um, Comes to them and says, "What the hell do you think you are doing?" And they give an answer which is really kind of interesting given the whole sweep of things. No, 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 no. This is a replica. This is just a replica. We have no intention. We never have. We will not in the future offer sacrifices here. It's just a replica of the real one or real ones that you have over in the Promised Land side of the Jordan, because we want to establish that we really care about that same path. Because we're afraid that if we don't have this replica, which doesn't articulate for us and our children that we are part of the same people as you over there on the west bank of the Jordan, the time is going to come when somebody's going to say, really, your children over there from the west side of the Jordan River will say to our children here on the east side of the river, we don't feel like we're this part of the same people. We don't have the same traditions. And so we built this replica to articulate to our kids and to your future progeny that we are really part of the same religion and the same people. Now, maybe there's a lot of protesting too much there. Maybe they got caught offering sacrifices and then they had to back down and give that little alibi. But what it says to me, that story of Joshua 22 linked over with our story today in Numbers 32 is that there is real anxiety about whether there is a national unity or an identity that we can all share if we live in very different places. And
So
that's a challenge that I think nations have.
I want to pick up on that point because what occurs to me is the resonance with secession is that in the mid 19th century, a number of individuals chose their state over the nation. And by joining the Confederacy, they withdrew from the body politic of what we call the United States. After the war, they were brought back in. What Gad and Reuben do is also withdraw themselves from the body politic because their tribal identity is more important than the national identity. And I think the concern is, can you belong to a people when you're separated geographically? The problem with the altar that's constructed in Transjordan, I think, is that that's saying that we don't really want to be a part of you. We want what you have over here. And therefore, I think it's more threatening than perhaps the Tanakh itself addresses. In a similar way, I think what happens in modern Israel is that people who put the Torah over the nation. And I think we, as small L liberal Jews living in the diaspora, can understand that many of the people studying Torah in yeshivot are not studying for the sake of Torah. They're studying to keep themselves out of the army.
Yeah.
They're removing themselves from the body politic. And that's very dangerous at all times. So what's curious in your remarks, Jeremy, is that the 9.5 tribes did not say, if you're a real Zionist, you have to come and join us. And I wonder why they didn't. So did they, the people that entered the land, actually understand that there can be a place for people outside the land? But the question that's raised is, when you are outside of the land, how do you demonstrate national allegiance?
Interesting.
You
So,
can't fight.
yeah.
So what can you do?
Well, so Moses does enlist them into the fight, and they do go into the fight. And I would say that Moses here, is demonstrating, a very strong quality of leadership by basically enlisting or strong arming these people and making a deal with them and saying, look, you can settle there, but first you got to come and join us. I would say, Barry, as you spoke about geography, and I think, Jeremy, it comes up in your remarks as well. Geography is a factor. It's like the literal factor of where you live. Uh, uh, but there's also another factor that unites entities into a this confederation or a union, and that is a story. And to what extent are they saying we don't want a part of the story? We're not part of this story. Uh, and to what extent is Moses saying, no, you are part of the story? And I think that is somewhere also in contemporary Israel where you have a good sector of the population saying, we are not sharing in the solidarity of the national story in the way that you are. We are trying to create an alternative story, and really where the friction exists in the Jewish people today is, what's your story? What's the story that links us? And I think, we don't have to, make specific examples to the Haredi population and the army. We can talk about to what extent are Jews throughout the world united in a story?
This is,
And
this is,
and
I
where is
think,
that
yeah,
tension? Yeah, go ahead.
this is incredibly important. In the United States, at a certain point, I don't think that this was entirely true, always, but we developed a pattern of saying we're a nation of immigrants. Um, even when there was more hostility to this or that ethnic group, the Irish or the Southern Europeans or the Eastern Europeans or whatever, there was precedent for this in America because America, from the 1776 days and the different states, and got really bad in the 1860s, as Barry alluded, was considered like a compound identity. And Virginians and Massachusetts people, they really weren't that similar, or so they could have felt. And yet they had decided to have a kind of a compound, relatively loose identity that was going to bring them all together. I mean, I think that there are certainly the American Civil War, and World War I and II had a good deal to do with, building bonds from people in different places. But still, in all, in America, we have an attitude towards religion, towards culture, towards free speech and diversity and dissent that says, all in all, we are enhanced and strengthened by not having a single story. We have a story about freedom, diversity, tolerance, and different stories can be knit into one big story.
That's it.
And I think that's a major way in which Americans understand their story. In Israel, it's a different vector because while there are diversity and dissent and different ways to tell the story of what it is to be Am Yisrael, it's such a hard problem because we do want to have one story. We want to have a Jewish story, and the story is inflected by the unique history of Am Yisrael through the centuries. It's why this is so hard to figure out the 25% of Israeli citizens who are not Jewish, who have, in many ways succeeded and thrived in public life, and it's only getting better, but culturally marginalized. Palestinian Knesset members, for doing something that we can think only is fair and reasonable. Ayman Udes spoke about the freedom for the Israeli Jewish hostages and also for the Palestinians. And they tried to censure him out of the Knesset. It's pretty hard to figure out how in Israel, not a fundamental story of diversity and tolerance and mosaic knit together. It's a story about unity, and we don't have that unity. It's partly the Haredim, it's partly the national religious settlers who themselves are diverse between people who are, they may be fundamentally to the right and kind of nationalist maximalists, but they believe in the rule of law, and they're not thugs and vigilantes. And then there are people who are thugs and vigilantes, and then there are people who are, entirely secular and do not relate to this traditional religious story. And so all I'm saying is really is a really hard problem, and the stakes are quite high for the Jewish people in
It's
wrestling.
so interesting you mentioned that because over the last 2 weeks, with the conflict in Syria between the Bedouins and the Druze in Syria and the Syrians. I mean, most of us really don't understand on never on a granular level. Never we don't understand what's going on here. But Israel really has come, has attempted to come to the defense of the Druze population that live in Syria because they're related to the Druze that live in Israel. And the Druze are unique people in that they serve in the army. There have been several members of the Druze community who have fallen in this war, as they have in previous wars. There are Druze, officers, generals in the army, and the Druze feel a tremendous sense of solidarity with Israel. They speak Hebrew and really participate in the life of Israel. And yet, um, a few years ago when the nation state amendment or basic law was proposed, the Druze were mightily offended by this because they say we also consider ourselves part of this country, and we sacrifice ourselves for the common defense, and we share in your story. It's really where the issue lies. It's to what extent are you part of the story? And going back to the text here, it's I'm reading it, and we're all kind of reading it and saying, the tension exists based on geography and based on a certain kind of economic and also livelihood. We're not interested. We want to distinguish ourselves. We also have, I think, a kind of latent uh, tension with the rest of you because we are firstborns and we didn't get the we got overlooked anyway, and
Right, because that really isn't the story,
yeah,
right? The story of the Torah, especially, is one where the firstborn is often put aside in favor of the privileged younger son.
right.
Yeah,
And trying
I'm
to
gonna
hold on
disagree.
to, go ahead.
I think that it's interesting what you said about uh, the Leahite tribes, but I think it's maybe barking up the wrong tree because Reuben, for sure, that's correct, and he has been marginalized, and you might it, look to the Reubenite withdrawal, the Reubenite refusal to take part in the Holy Land as being downstream of his marginalization, downstream well-deserved marginalization. You remember he had an affair with Bilhah, so that
There
wasn't
you
very nice.
go. That's well,
So, but God for sure is not a firstborn. He happens to be the chronologically firstborn of the Peleg Shut, but that doesn't confer any status. And Menashe, if there's
It's
status, he's successfully part of the effective firstborn of Joseph, because Joseph is the guy who, in fact, gets the
Tishnai.
bracha that is diverted from Reuben. So Menashe is like not the marginalized guy. He's the guy who gets the silver spoon in his mouth. So it's
Right, but
not.
I think in fairness to Elliot's position, it's not always what the status is, it's the perceived status.
yeah.
And
Okay.
I think there's a psychological dimension that's worth thinking about. But I wanted to get back to Joshua 22. So it seems that the correct response of the tribes on the east side of the Jordan would have been to come to Eretz Yisrael to make their sacrifices. That would have shown their allegiance to the greater good than building, a knockoff on the east side of the Jordan, where they can pretend that they're participating in something that they really have no share in.
Well, interesting. Well, with that, we're coming to the end of our time, and we didn't even get to the Haftorah, but I'm sure that that's okay. Uh, we'll talk about prophetic readings next week. Um, in the meantime, we want to wish everyone a beautiful Shabbat, and As always, thank you all for watching, for listening. We really appreciate it. We're honored that you spend the time with us. And for those of our colleagues who look at our or listen to our show and get lots of ideas, you're welcome. You're
We
welcome.
give it to you. We give it to you.
We'll give it to
Let's
you.
yeah. Give it
Go
to you.
ahead. All
No, no.
right. So we're going to say Shabbat Shalom. Thanks a lot. And Ramah, Kol Ramah, 102.3. We'll see you next week on the next edition of Parsha Talk. Bye bye for now.
Shabbat shalom.
Okay.